So the reason I know her is because Iggy produced a song for her. He produced a song for Tate McRae. And when I've checked her out, it was like, she's a TikTok star.
Yeah.
Jake Paul has music, right? Like the Les twins, who are like breakdancers, have music. So it's not really so much that like musicians should become entertainers. It's that like entertainers are becoming musicians.
Right.
So what are you going to do? Are you just going to let them eat your pie and you don't try to eat theirs? You know, like that's what's happening. The top 40 is like a lot of them aren't musicians originally. That's not what they're known for originally.
Right.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am your co-host, Jack, and I am flying solo today, but not really. Don't be worried. I'm super excited to bring Entrepreneur CEO Kyle Circa Lemaire back onto the podcast, and welcome, Cirque. It's been a minute. I'm super excited to have you and chat about some really cool stuff today. Welcome back.
Yeah, man. It's been a while. Don't call me CEO. I'm just a team player.
Yes.
And that's it, dude. I'm super glad to be back. It's been a hot minute, and I've missed these hollowed halls, dude.
Yeah, I'm pumped to have you back, man. When you, for our listeners, Cirque had reached out to me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, man, I would love to come back on the podcast and talk about just, retouch on some trends that we've definitely touched on before on the podcast and kind of talk about the role of artists in the world, in culture, in society, and also sort of share some of the things that you've been working on in your own artist project and how they kind of all tie in together. So I was super intrigued to, kind of get some ground level knowledge on what you're working on, and also just, touch on some of the trends that we always tend to come back to here on the podcast and at Entrepreneur as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. I think like when Entrepreneur started in earnest, it was the environment was a lot different than it is today. And certainly, my thinking has changed, not necessarily like, my opinions are that much different than they were before, but certainly have evolved. And yeah, I think that it's as good a time as any to come and sort of like check out where we're at in terms of like the social artist landscape. And then also, talk about what the implications of that are for what artists can do to like make an impact. And I think, I'm definitely speaking from a place of experience here. Back when I was on the podcasts, as a co-host and as a host, I hadn't really been releasing records. I've always been a musician since I'm 12 years old, but I hadn't been making studio music since I was like 23. And at the time, right. So like, it's definitely been a minute now. I'm, 2 releases deep with a third kind of on the way. Might already be out by the time this publishes. And in the backlog, we have like 14 finished mixes, and we've been posting content to Instagram, like long form, short form, lots of content to Instagram almost every day for the past, I want to say 2.5 months. And so that's definitely given me some perspective in terms of, a lot of the things that artists ask us about, which is like Instagram and followers and like sort of more clout-based things.
Right.
Because that's kind of the space, oddly enough, that I'm operating in now, except, with a digital marketing slant on it.
Yeah, for sure. So, that's really interesting. It kind of brings to mind 2 things here. One in particular, like way back, one of the things that you had talked about, I think probably the last time or the time before that you were on the podcast, was talking about, going deep into your own artistry and how you were going to be hanging out sort of in the introduction and education stages of the buddy system, or, discovery and engagement, and how that was going to be like a prime focus of yours for.
That's what we talked about last time I was on the podcast.
I think it might have been one of the last times that you were on the podcast.
That's wild, dude. Wow. What a time capsule.
Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah.
So it's a nice little recap, and I think a perfect time to do it. And, you said it well, like not only has things so much changed as far as like, the cultural landscape for artists since, the inception of Entrepreneur and when you were really even heavily releasing music earlier on, but also just within the past year and a half, the landscape has changed drastically and been shaken up by, everything going on in the world. So this is I think this is a perfect time to kind of open up the time capsule, and also hopefully throw us forward into the future here. So I'm super pumped. Where do you want to get started? I mean, I think a refresher on what you've been up to with your artist project would be really, really cool.
For sure. So at the beginning of the year at Entrepreneur, we started this new sort of like workshop group, like a focus like group with myself, a couple of other team members from Entrepreneur, and then like 100 indies from our community. We did a Black Friday like special last year. So basically they got like our Indie Pro annual membership, but then they just got this workshop on top of it for Black Friday.
Right.
And so what that was like to teach indies the exact workflow processes that we use at Entrepreneur, and that like certainly I've learned a lot about over the last year. And so, I made myself sort of a case study for that workshop, where it was like, guys, I'm going to be doing this with you. I'm in the exact same position a lot of you are in, and let's do it together. And I can show, like, that way I have a perspective where I can show you, what it's like, and that it is possible. And so, January 1st, like and Scrum is like the workflow that we kind of taught, Scrum for artists, you might say. And I started running Scrum for artists, quote unquote, January 1st of this year. And the goal, my first big goal, which is part of Scrum, is like setting a longer term goal, was to get to a place where we're, producing a finished, mixed, mastered new song every 2 weeks. In addition to that, producing an advertisable video for a song every 2 weeks, doing campaigns, releases, and then also having like kind of some content and some photos and stuff. And that really came to a head in February, because we had finished the song part. We were getting a finished mix every 2 weeks, and it wasn't even really that hard. We had time left over. But when it came time to start creating an albeit ambitious first goal for what content was going to look like, I quickly realized, like, pre-proing, setting up lights, shooting all this stuff by myself, and needing external cam ops and all that, like, it's not really feasible. And so I dialed it back, and really just kind of a stroke of luck happened, where one day, we were in a session. So I kind of need to give a little bit more context. I don't want to get lost in the weeds, but basically through this whole process, like, my project has become a music company that's part owned by the people who collaborate on these songs. Ownership doesn't have any financial gain. It's just for voting. And then, like, certainly on every song, every person who contributed is like a part owner in that song, is like a tiny little company. And I just say that to say that, like, we Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 2 to 7, and thank God for Entrepreneur's flexible work schedule that I take advantage of by kind of rearranging my
shout
hours.
out.
Yeah, shout outs. So like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we have sessions. It started off with just Mondays, and it went to Monday, Wednesdays, and recently Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And, it doesn't happen every single week. There are many weeks, like, rarely do we actually hit all 3 days of a week, but it's a good chance for me and my collaborators to get together and make music. And so that guarantees the song cycle part of that goal. But then it was like one session I was hanging out, and the two collaborators I collaborate with most frequently, actually the three I collaborate with most frequently, are insane producers. They're like very good producers, like in all different contexts of that word, like, beat maker, sure, but record producer as well, multi-instrumentalist as well. So it's like intimidating because I can produce
powerhouse. Yeah,
but it's like I'm not like these guys, and it's just insane watching them work. So they were heavy into a production session, and I was like, what can I contribute to this? We're not doing lyrics for this. Like, what can I do? I don't want to just get buried in my computer doing like admin. So I pulled out a camera and I just started shooting it. And I do that from time to time, but like I shot this whole session. And then the next day I got curious, like in the morning before work, and I just like threw the footage into Premiere Pro and just started looking at it because I thought it might look cool. And then within an hour, I cut together like 2 little 1-minute videos with this like cool little typography style and different film conversions and just like cool little stuff that I like was using in other projects at the time that I just threw in. And then I put it out on Instagram as like a little carousel of like an episode. And that's still on our Instagram. You can see it at Some Kid Punk, but it's like
we'll link to that. We'll link to your IG in the show notes
for sure. And
check
please
it out,
don't
follow what you're doing.
You know, if the music's not your cup of tea, please don't follow me and don't like listen to the music on Spotify. You can kind of tell from the Instagram posts like different ranges of the genres we do, but just to not clog up the data, like please, you know, avoid following if it's not stuff that you're interested in.
For sure.
So yeah, that said, like I put it out and it did really well. And at that moment, I kind of realized like, wait, I don't have to do a music video and a performance video and a fan finder for like every song and worry about all this stuff. I can just film every session. I've got access to 2 cameras and then we have like tons of little cameras. I have a doorbell camera that has been used in the episodes, you know? Yeah. So like any camera that, you know, will do. I've used like tons of different little webcams and stuff. And so it's like, okay, set these up. Let's get footage of all the sessions. And then the next day, it takes me an hour to cut together these little dailies, which is what we ended up calling them. And then that's our content. That's our content, not just for when, you know, we need content every day to feed the beast, but it's also content like when a song's coming out, I can go back and I have archived footage of every song and every sound that goes into that song. I have the video of when it was like when it happened. So it was like total luck that all worked out in that way.
Yeah.
And then I just like, I wasn't ready yet to start introduction marketing in earnest, like to actually get into Business Manager and start creating test campaigns and stuff. But I was curious and bored, so I just threw like a little $150 budget on one of those dailies.
Yeah.
And it was nuts. Like I just did it I made myself a quick audience, like an interest-based audience, pretty broad, with some location limiting to try to like, hey, if this is going to be a repeatable thing, I'll just build up in these markets that I personally think are valuable for me. And then I just did some interest-based targeting. That's it. And in Instagram, didn't even go into Business Manager. And it went nuts, like just for like getting profile visits, because I'm trying to build up a retargetable audience, and getting followers is definitely a way to do that on Instagram. And so I just went for profile visits, which doesn't even really speak to the idea that you're going to get a whole lot of followers. But sure enough, we were getting followers for like, you know, anywhere from like 25 cents up to $1. And that was insane. Like it kind of opened my eyes to like, you know, typically I haven't thought about behind the scenes content outside the context of like YouTube. Like if you're going to have a YouTube channel as an artist, sure. Like you should have like Kenny Beats, like The Cave. You should have like an episodic thing. Probably. It's a great form
John Bellion's long form studio videos. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So like that makes perfect sense, but I never thought of it as an acquisition asset, as something you get new attention with. But
right.
And it might be that it's short form, it's on Instagram, so it's action packed, right? Because you can't fit like a whole day into a minute without it being pretty exciting, unless like the day is just really boring. So maybe that speaks to it, but either way, it became a thing, and it is a thing. We went from I think like 1,180 followers last month at some point, or maybe even like the end of May, and now we're at like 2,060, and it's continuing to climb. The rate is climbing as well, and then we started releasing the songs on Spotify about 4 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and we're going to be releasing every 2 weeks. And so that's kind of that's like the prefix. That's like the answer to like what has happened since the last episode. It's also the answer to like, you know, what's the context we need to know for this episode.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, like zoomed out 30,000 foot view, basically the place that you found yourself in was I'm making music. I'm collaborating with people in this project together, you know, working as a unit. We're working, you know, diligently planning tasks together and making them happen in increments, and you're putting out content, very, you know, somewhat candid content of those sessions. Yeah. It's behind the scenes type stuff, and using that as an introduction kind of vessel.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely isn't meant to be like a tutorial on how to do precisely what I did, but I will say that
For
like
sure,
there's
yeah.
so much value in having a reliable, recurring like session, a standing session that's going to happen. Not only does it make you create a lot more music and be really like disciplined about that, but it creates opportunities for lots of content.
Right. Yeah. That's so interesting. You know, like something we've talked about on the podcast plenty of times when it comes to like building up a backlog of content, whether it be something that's going to go into like a gated experience or to go along with a record release or something like that. We've always kind of sort of softly preached the idea of like, make it as you go rather than trying to catch up. And, you know, you're kind of taking that ethos on straight to the chest, really. And just using it for a different purpose. You're not backlogging it for later. Or, I mean, it certainly could be used for later for other things, but it's living, you know, for a content piece that you're putting out there and finding a lot of success with.
It's yeah. So there's a couple different interesting points there. Is like one is like the model we're following is very much like Russ, Toby Nwigwe, you know, like these artists who have made really big impacts just by having a consistency to what they're doing. Like a reliability, like a schedule. You can show up, you can tune in because you know what they're doing. And it's like information that's just in your mind. Like if you don't know who Toby Nwigwe is, you know, go check him out. He's amazing. Him and his wife and all their friends are just like the most creative people you'll ever see. And they've become huge, and it's just off the strength of consistency and like a format. And, you know, it's just remarkable that like I can just tell you, oh yeah, Toby Nwigwe's got a new song coming out next week, because I know that that's the case. You know what I mean? And and for Russ, for the longest time, it was the same thing. And I think that like I definitely got starry eyes when I saw it confirmed with Toby Nwigwe, and I was like, that's probably what I want to do. I want to start releasing music and never stop, because it's like this, I don't do well with like things I can't make a routine, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Totally. I mean, I feel you on that quite a bit. It's hard to fit things into a busy day as a creative if you don't plan it into your routine, you know, like ad hoc random things, chaos thrown into the mix of your week or your 2 weeks or your month or whatever tend to not produce, you know, at least for people like you and people like me, tend to not produce like favorable outcomes. Yeah, it doesn't work out. And not only that, but it's like, it's not that it doesn't work out because of like some mysticism about routines or anything, or some like fluff that I could give you about having a routine. It's just that a routine is just a commitment. It is a commitment of time that you've made standing. So you're just like non-negotiable. This is what's happening. It's like a commitment that just lives on perpetually. And so it's the commitment that you're making. It's that you're committed that is the thing, you know? Totally. Yeah. That's exactly it.
Yeah. But yeah, man. So that sort of like set off the journey. Since then, I've come to this sort of, or I'm coming to some conclusions and realizations that like, first of all, I'm not the only one who's doing what we're doing. I know that there's a high preponderance of behind the scenes and in studio and like during the creation of content out there, and has been for a while. Like Aries, we share Aries. I showed you Aries a while back.
Yeah,
he's fire.
I love Aries. Yeah, so good.
He did the same thing. The reason John Bellion got so huge, in my opinion, is the videos like that. And
dude, yeah, I say all the time, I discovered John Bellion not from his music initially. It was from his videos. Content. Like that was my first exposure to him as an artist, was these videos. And I was like, damn, dude, this guy is so good. Like I'm entertained to the point where I'm sucked in and I'm watching this, 15-minute studio video. Yeah. I'm like, I'm biting into it hard, you know? So when I did go eventually listen to his music, probably shortly after that video, I was in, I was there. It pretty much converted me to a fan.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And I think that that's like such a major part of it, right? Like it's like good music has always been sort of the centerpiece, right? Like great music that's going to impress people. The only X factor has always been, how are you going to get them to hear it so that they can be impressed? Yeah, and how are you going to be so compelling in that interaction that it happens again and again? How are you going to ensure it happens again and again? That's really like the...
predictably, consistently.
We just reduce marketing down to a simple line of code. In terms of music marketing, like that's your central challenge. If you don't have good music, like obviously that's a huger problem. That's prereq. Once you're there, I've found that this not only impacts how you're going to get an audience, but how you're going to monetize that audience as well. Because certainly, like in the age of streaming, you know, everyone in the music industry has themselves fooled that like, oh, this is a viable business again. You know, like this is a really powerhouse industry again, thanks to streaming. And it's like, you guys are getting $1 million checks again, but that doesn't mean that your industry still isn't playing around in the sandbox, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of artists out there who may not realize that they know it, like what I've just said, but they're certainly acting like they know it. They're acting like they know that like streaming is playing around in the sandbox, and the real money and the real attention and the real growth and the real actual like impact is in world building. Building. And you nerds out there will know what I'm talking about when I say world building.
But we've touched on this a little bit too, even recently in the podcast, just talking about, you know, live streaming and some of the work that artists have done, you know, throughout like quarantine and coronavirus and whatnot, with building really compelling, not only compelling like technologically and visually, but also, you know, from a narrative perspective, building live stream events and experiences for their fans that really feel like they're, you know, world building. Yeah.
It's sort of like, you know, who does world building really, really well is Ja.
Yeah. Big Ja.
Yeah. He's amazing. So he's like a YouTuber. Check him out. He's amazing. And he's like got all these catchphrases. He's got all these characters. He's got all these things that are going to reoccur. And part of making someone familiar with your brand and what you're putting out is that reliability, is take the most energetic moments and don't ever let them happen once. It can't be just once. Everything is a series. Everything has the potential to be a new catchphrase, a new inside joke, a t-shirt. I'll give you an example. Through our ads, we had a particular ad, like one of the dailies has just done really, really well. And I think it's because the song that's featured in it, it's a series of dailies, right? So I know it's the song because it's only the dailies that have this song in it. And they just do exceptionally well in terms of like boosting those posts. And a gentleman came in off that, like a fan of ours, I guess. And he commented in the comments, OP1 Kenobi, because Iggy plays the OP1 synthesizer primarily while he's producing. And he called Iggy OP1 Kenobi. And then it happened again weeks later, and someone else who he knew that I don't know was like, he's like certified it. He was like, yeah, he definitely is OP1 Kenobi. They're friends. They're talking about it in their worlds, and now it's in our world. And so what I'm doing is I hit up our designer friend, Casey, and I was like, I'm gonna send you a bunch of photos. I need you to make like a mixtape style rap tee for OP1 Kenobi. That will be our first merchandise. Not only because it's like fun that we can just spin it off of like a comment on Instagram, and that he'll certainly be geeked out, that fan, but also because it's like the energy's there, and why not? And like now we're creating a tangible world, like an inside joke, references that fans can share. I think that really is the opportunity that you have in BTS. I don't think John Bellion did that a whole lot. And I think that was like the one leg missing from his tripod. Great music.
Yeah.
Great music. And then like an abnormal or like a greater than average view into the creation of that music. And then as if it's like something that you're supposed to see, like Kenny Beats the Cave on YouTube, but it's just missing that world. I don't know what John Bellion's world is. I know a little bit about his production world from that documentary and like all his friends he came up with in music. I know a little bit about it. I saw it on stage when I saw him live because I saw those people reoccur, but there's no culture to it that I can grab onto. So yeah,
right. It doesn't make you a part of it.
Right. I don't have like unique Bellion-ish things, you know, except for like production ideas are Bellion-ish or less Bellion-ish.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point just about, and I mean, it kind of goes back to what you said about like, you know, the future monetization in the music industry doesn't lie in streaming. That's like child's play right. when compared to world building. And, you know, I think you explained world building really well by relating that, you know, that really simple story of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and this could be, you know, your first piece of merch, and there's fans who know about it and they continue to tell each other about it or talk about it without you guys even being there.
Right.
And I think where you often see this play out, and I see it in a lot of like comment sections, for example, for a number of our clients at IndieX, for example, you know, particularly on videos that are being well received or content that's being well received and getting a lot of engagement, you'll see fans interacting with one another around things like catchphrases or inside jokes or just stuff that they pick up or make up themselves, and then all of a sudden it becomes like an idea or a reality. I see that happen all the time.
Yeah, man. It's like, I think like one of my favorite examples in music marketing is like those who are longtime listeners of this podcast will know, like, look at Insane Clown Posse, look at the Misfits, right? Like these are world builders. Certainly Insane Clown Posse, you know, for those of you who are not familiar, like all of their fans participate in some kind of like religious, you know, origin story about like carnivals and shit. And it's like, okay, that's a world that all of their fans live in. All of the associated artists on their label also exist in that world. Every piece of merchandise exists in that world. And it's a merchandise empire, the likes of which like certainly like even major label top 40 artists don't know anything about. And yeah, it's wild to see that. And this is not like a purely capitalist thing. Like, I don't want you to get that impression. The realization of this thing's, I guess, economic potential, this idea's economic potential is after the fact, right? Primary is like, oh man, we need to create so much content, and like, oh, we have this cool, okay, and like, oh, I can slap this on it, okay, put it out, and like people like it, and it's like, let's do more, let's do them every session, and then like, oh, people want to participate in the inside jokes we're creating in that content. Okay, let's give them ways to participate.
Right.
Building it's brand building, right? Like I say world building, but like this is a lot of what an entertainment brand is. It's what YouTube stars are about. Like Peter McKinnon certainly built a world in which like he wakes up every day, he makes coffee from scratch, and then he like, you know, uses Canon cameras to photograph and film things all day in Canada. And that's his life. And he's an outdoor guy, and he is extreme, you know, this or that. And he loves making things with leather. And like, I know all these things because I watched his vlog.
Right.
You know, like that's a crazy amount of experience to pack into like episodic viewership, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, you bring up a really good point. Like, the YouTuber kind of space, even like vloggers in particular, I think lean into this somewhat naturally because of the fact that, like, you know, if you're doing a, you know, maybe like a daily vlog or a weekly vlog and going into your life and what you're doing with your friends and whatever else it is that you're interested in, naturally, like, for one, inside jokes are going to come up along the way, and open loops are going to happen naturally, you know? So people are looking to the next thing that you're doing and looking for the treasure that you left behind in the last video there again. You know, it's like if you, I don't know, like something silly like, oh, you know, last week I was watching my friend's dog and it was staying at my house, and, you know, that was in my video. The dog was in my video and like wandered into a room. If that happens again in the next episode, it automatically becomes something that clicks to people, and they say, oh, well, I remember that from the last time. Like, it's becoming a recurring theme. Fans look for that. Often.
Yeah.
Very often. I know I find myself doing it all the time for the artists that I like. You look for kind of, it sometimes starts out like Easter eggs, you know, unintentionally, maybe from the creative side, but it could start out like Easter eggs and then becomes like a realized thing that fans kind of latch onto and make their own.
Yeah. And it's also something that, like, you know, I remember, how do I say this? There are cultural modes of being which I no longer participate in, but I remember everything. I remember all the little catchphrases. I remember all the little, like, verbs and things you can do and should do in that culture. You know what I mean?
Right.
That stuff stays with you and it lives forever. And so, you know, music does too. This just happens to complement that in such a way that can draw attention to the music. And certainly that's what it's done for us, because people listen to our records and we're getting sentiment back where it's like, I feel like I know you guys because I spend, like, you know, 2 minutes every day with you guys, or 3 minutes every day. And
yeah, that's such a powerful point to make.
Yeah,
man. Like, that's it. Like, and I get on my high horse and, like, get on the pulpit here often about, like, live streaming and stuff like that, and how, like, at the core of it, it's getting your people, your tribe, to take that, to carve out that 5 minutes, that 2 minutes, whatever it is, out with you. And that's why, because at the end of the day, that's what gets them to know you and know that they align with you.
Yeah, I'm kind of, you know, to be honest with you, these days I'm so bearish on live stream performances. But live stream interaction, I'm incredibly bullish on, especially if it's branded live stream interaction with a schedule that people know they can show up for, and it is interactive. They ask questions, or they, you know, this or that. It's interesting how the pandemic has changed all that. I used to think, like, live stream performances are tight, but they've lost all of their novel characteristics.
100%. Yeah. We have beat that horse to death. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, I mean, this is really interesting. Like, I think, you know, movie fandoms are like this, where the people who go really deep into, I don't know, pick any movie,
take all the Kevin Smith movies.
Yeah. Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
He literally calls it the View Askew universe because his company is View Askew, like, films or something.
Yeah.
And they're all interrelated, and they all have references to each other in them. And every Pixar movie has a reference to the next Pixar movie in the last one.
Yeah. And I mean, you can look at Star Wars, you can look at Star Trek, you can certainly look at things like the Marvel films and the universe that's been built there. Like, all of that. And the fans that hang out in it, like, that deep devotion is kind of, I think, what we're getting at here about, like, where the future of this thing is going. You know, if I can be so bold to say that. Yeah,
I think that, like, I want to delineate here, because, like, why make an episode about this? Are you telling all people, all musicians, if they want to be successful, that they have to, like, put out, like, behind the scenes micro content on Instagram every day? Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you are like me, not just completely, like, turned off by the idea of creating content, if that's something that sounds cool to you, that you love doing, you know, and you just want to be able to do it better and easier, okay, then I'm talking to the right person. It's like, insofar as, like, you're an artist who wants to use that content to, like, do what I'm saying, build a world. And I would say, like, you know, iPhones definitely cut it, but having, you know, a little camera with some, like, manageable file sizes that you can edit with, and learning to edit. You know, a year ago, I was saying that this was, like, kind of a